Hello, everyone, and welcome to Common Sense with Dr. Ben Carson. I'm your host, Ben Carson, and over the coming weeks, we're going to spend a few episodes doing a deep dive into some of the really important issues that impact all of us. A topic that has always been near and dear to my heart is health and healthcare. When I was 8 years old, I decided that I was going to become a doctor, and I loved particularly missionary stories, missionary doctors who traveled all over the world at great personal sacrifice to bring physical, mental, and spiritual healing to people. Somehow, that has gotten away from us as a society, and we're not paying as much attention as we used to. But in the news recently, because of the debate over Obamacare subsidies that was highlighted during the shutdown, it's a topic that many people want to talk about again, which is good. But, it's always been in the background, but now we need to bring it to the foreground. So as we're talking about, we'll discuss topics surrounding healthcare finance, health and nutrition, and how we got to where we are today as a whole. Today, I'm excited, first of all, that the podcast has been back after a little hiatus, but to have one of the key voices in the whole arena of healthcare for our society, and that is Tony Lyons. I think a lot of you have heard that name. Some of you may not know all the context around all the things that he's been doing, but he's really one of the precipitators of the Maha movement. Even before everybody knew what Maha was, Tony was dealing with it, and we're going to find out from him today why it is that this struck such a chord with him, even as a young person. So, Tony, welcome, first of all, to the podcast on such a very important topic, and thank you for the effort that you put into it. Before Maha even existed, you were involved in health and wellness. What was that moment in your life that made you feel that health and wellness should become a political movement and not just a cultural conversation?
Yeah, there were a few different things. There was a moment about 30 years ago when I had always been pretty healthy. I'd played a lot of sports and didn't feel like I was eating all that badly, but I was working very hard, and I just started eating a little bit more than I'd eaten in the past, and then one day I met some friends at the gym, and they looked at me and they said, "What happened to you?" And I said, "I don't know what you mean." And they said, "You look a lot different." And they got me to go on the scale, and I hadn't been on the scale in kind of a long time. And like, I think, maybe 40% of the American population, I had become obese, and it just sort of happened suddenly. I was not aware of it. I didn't think that I had done anything particularly wrong other than work out a little bit less, get less sunlight, eat a little bit worse foods, and eat foods that had a lot of chemicals in them, lots of things in them that make you much more likely to become obese. And I found that I had gained 60 pounds in about a 2-year period. And when I look at pictures of myself then, it's really, really scary. How quickly it happened and how little I had to do in this country to get there. And then how relatively simple it was to start to come back from that. So that was a really big change. I mean, I was able to lose about 60 pounds without taking any drugs, without making, drastic changes, but just by doing a bunch of things that made sense. So that was one really big change for me. And then the other big change was I had a daughter, and the daughter was very healthy up until about 4 years old, and then suddenly regressed into autism, and so that was it's a very long, complicated story. But that whole story of seeing somebody who was in good health, my own child, suddenly become really, really unhealthy, and at a point where her life was just an absolute wreck. Just a mess. She had gone from this really sweet, gentle girl to somebody who had no control over her body, was really neurologically damaged, and it was dramatic damage, and she couldn't tell the difference between hot and cold. She couldn't control her feelings, her emotions, her actions. She had impulse regulation problems, developed rapid onset OCD. So just symptom after symptom. And so watching that happen to a loved one, which I think is true of a lot of people in this country who have seen their own children, their own family really suffer. And that was a big turning point for me.
Interesting. Now, you've traveled all across the country, been involved with lots of events, and encountered people from across the political spectrum. What have you found to be the reception to Maha across political spectrum?
Yeah, I would think when you think of the issues that Maha stands for, that we're sort of looking at, you know, something like 70% of the public suffering from at least one chronic disease. Um, you know, People are really open to the idea, just in really, really high numbers. Maybe 95% of the public want things like, healthier food in schools for their children. They want really strict rules about conflicts of interest in government that is approving chemicals in their food, dyes in their food, all of those kinds of things. There's really broad consensus there. But to some extent, like anything else, it becomes political. And so even though so many people recognize that we have a real crisis of trust in our government agencies, that's across the board, and we also have a crisis in corruption, and that we can't end the chronic disease epidemic unless we fight that corruption. And I think, almost the entire population recognizes that.
Well, what parts of the Maha movement really get your juices flowing? What really excites you about what you see that's going on in our society right now?
Yeah, for me, it's the opportunity to have dramatic change, um, without having to do too much. That if the government makes some just basic changes, and if we can get cultural change to really begin to take root, where people just recognize that there are much better choices they can make. So if you have that on the demand level and also on the government level, where there are things put in place that incentivize doctors to do a better job rather than to give you more drugs or more vaccines or more interventions, and you encourage people on a national basis to just live healthier lives. So it really feels to me like you can address so much of chronic disease in a relatively short time with relatively short changes, small changes, and that I think is just an incredible possibility for the future, that we could do such a better job, that it doesn't have to be that hard, and that it can happen relatively quickly.
Absolutely. And, I've actually been kind of amazed at how some of the food companies that have been with us for decades have so quickly come to the table and said, we're going to change our ways. We recognize that this is not helpful for our society and that we've played a part in it. And, these are not bad people, but, they were more interested in how much money they were making than how much health they were promoting in our society. And I'm encouraged that they're coming to the table. But people like yourself who've highlighted all of this have done us a great service. Uh, Now, you've heard the statistics about the children and how many of them are unhealthy. What do you think is the government's responsibility in helping to change that?
I mean, to a great extent, I would like to see the government get out of the way in many areas. That we've set up a system that incentivizes people to do the wrong thing. So I'd like to see them change that around and start to incentivize doctors, teachers, people in every area of healthcare to do things that are better for people, to tell people the truth, and to encourage companies to do that and not protect gigantic companies that are sort of preying on the public, that have been lying to the public, poisoning the public for a generation. And I think your point is a great one, that it is really heartening to see that these companies are willing to come to the table. And that, I think, more than anything else, is if these companies recognize that the world's changing, that the demand is starting to change, that people have access to new ideas, and that they think about high fructose corn syrup or ultra processed foods or seed oils or beef tallow. These are all kind of concepts that people didn't think about even 1 year back. So the language changes, and people start to see we can make simple changes. We can look at food labels and make better choices for ourselves, for our children, and then maybe we're not going to have the sickest children on earth. Maybe it shouldn't be that difficult for a country that spends 2 to 3 times as much money on healthcare than any other country on the planet to do a better job. That you should be able to buy something with that money.
No question about it. And I'm sure you're aware of Vladimir Lenin, who said that gaining control of people's health care is the key, it's the linchpin to promoting socialism and a government takeover. And you can sort of see how that is very true. If you're the one who provides the most important thing that a person has, as opposed to encouraging personal responsibility, educating people about what nutrition really is and how it impacts them, how it impacts their children. Do you think Lenin was right in his assessment?
Sure. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt that in order to have real freedom and in order to have a liberated life, you really have to be physically healthy, mentally healthy, spiritually healthy. If you're not, as Secretary Kennedy says, people who are healthy have 1,000 choices. People who are chronically ill, they're only thinking about one thing. They're just thinking about how to get to the next day, how to manage their symptoms. So there's no freedom whatsoever if you're sick, if you're chronically ill, and so that really is a way to control a population. And I don't think anyone in this country wants to be controlled in that way. So the only way to have that happen is to be dishonest with people. And so just telling the truth becomes this kind of revolutionary act.
That unfortunately is true. The truth is kind of hard to get at sometimes. And the people are innocent in the sense that they're trusting and they believe anybody who's an official must have their best interest in mind. I think less so now. The trust in government and in the healthcare facilities in general has taken a pretty severe blow after the COVID crisis and the way that it was handled. But, you know, it's obvious that we need to be talking about how do we administer health as well. What do you need for good health care? You need a patient and you need a healthcare provider. Along has come the middleman to facilitate the relationship, and now it has become the principal entity controlling both the actions of the patient and the healthcare provider. Do you think there's a way that we can get out of that mess?
I mean, I think one of the key things is that, we have to make it easy for people to be healthy. We have to make it more affordable, and we have to give the people tools to make better choices for themselves. So part of that's going to really um, be built on fighting the entrenched kind of corrupt practices that have incentivized doctors to do the wrong thing. And then we need to, lower drug prices, increase access to care, um, lower premiums, work on maybe telemedicine, use technology to increase affordability. But all of those things are just a piece of the puzzle. And we really need people to be skeptical, to have curiosity, to question authority, and not to start to substitute one kind of settled science for a new kind of settled science. So we don't know all of the answers, but people have to get into the mindset of this is an adventure, that these companies that have been providing products to us, haven't had our best interest in mind. But if we change, they will change too.
Have we gone too far down the road? 77% of our young people who apply for military service are not accepted because of their condition. 77%. How in the world did that happen? And, cancer is increasing among our young people. Do those kind of numbers really wake people up? And what can we do to really promote the fact that we've caused this ourselves? This is not something that's naturally occurring. And there are places in the world called blue zones where the people generally live to be much longer, much healthier lives than the rest of us. What do you think about all of that?
Yeah, so I think that we're at a point where, and I hear it now from a lot of different people who I talk to, that we could live to 150 to 170, that people can be so much healthier just by making subtle changes to their lives. And one of the roadblocks to that is that to a great extent, the companies that have uh, been a big part of why we've gotten to this point, um, have been fighting really hard to to make sure that change doesn't happen, because they have a revenue stream that is dramatic, that they're making so much money on it. And, so they then go after anybody who tries to tell the truth, and they call them anti-science. They call them conspiracy theorists. They, call them an anti-vaxxer. If there are 6 different polio vaccines and you think one of them isn't as good as the other 5, you're called an anti-vaxxer. So it's really an extreme thing that you have to be right on board, or you get attacked. But I think the general public is recognizing that these are corporate talking points, and that you know that people have to be curious. People have to look into the details. They have to learn for themselves, and that when they start making better decisions, and when they refuse to accept this system, then the companies themselves, like they're doing now, will come to the table because they'll see that it's not going to be profitable anymore to produce things that cause chronic disease.
Absolutely. Amen. As I've said many times before, common sense is not that common anymore. But our guest today has plenty of it. And, we've been talking about the Maha movement and its impact in the past. But now let's talk a little bit about what's ahead. What's ahead for Maha? Now, Tony, do you think America is sick because of what we eat or because of the way that our society is structured?
Yeah, so I think that it's a combination of the way we live and of the kind of stories we've been told and the products we've been given. So, we were told, I don't know, 30 years ago that sugar was really, really bad for you. And that was dramatic. People heard that story. They thought sugar was connected to cancer, to all kinds of other problems. But then they substituted that with high fructose corn syrup. And so we all thought we're reading packaging that says it's sugar free. So we thought, okay, that's a great thing. Let's eat that. And then you got an even greater surge of obesity and of chronic disease. And one of the properties of high fructose corn syrup seems to be that people who eat it in large quantities can't tell when they're full. So they just keep on eating. And it's a synthetic sugar, so it turns out to potentially be worse than sugar. Sugar is still really bad for you, still leads to chronic disease, but this is a worse form of it. So it took us all these years to kind of get to that point, and now we're back to products all saying that they contain cane sugar and not high fructose corn syrup, even though we've already been down that road and there are hundreds and hundreds of peer-reviewed studies showing that sugar is really bad for you. So we need to get beyond those sort of lies and those strategies that have led us to be sick. So, we've had all these years of people eating so much high fructose corn syrup and not knowing when they're full. Now we're giving people Ozempic and they don't know when they're hungry. So we're just playing with people's bodies. And we have to get back to a point where we just eat good, healthy food, where we put as few drugs in our bodies as possible, where we let our immune systems do as much as they can possibly do. And we generally get more sunlight, live a healthier life, lead a more spiritual life, all of the things that lead to health and wellness. And I think that's possible. And that's really what the Maha movement stands for. It's not about banning things. It's about, coming to a point where people can make better decisions, and then companies are forced by their profit motive to make better decisions that help us as well. So I think all of that can kind of start to come together and lead to chronic disease rates beginning to plummet.
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot that we can do by just educating people about how the body works. One of the real problems with fast food is that you get it quickly, you eat it quickly, and you don't give the body's society satiety mechanism a chance to work. If you eat more slowly, your blood glucose levels rise. That it's monitored by the ventromedial hypothalamic nucleus, which says you have enough. But if you bypass that, you just keep eating right beyond the time that the satiety center can tell you what to do. It's interesting. You can take a rat in the laboratory and you can ablate a portion of the hypothalamus, and they will become enormously fat to the point where they can't even move. And just to show you that there are feedback mechanisms, but we have to learn how they work. Eat your food slowly, enjoy your food, and the satiety apparatus will keep you from overeating. Just simple things like that, but I would guarantee that the vast majority of our society doesn't know that.
Definitely. And one of the really scary things though is the extent to which the mainstream media takes part in the dishonesty of the whole system. Where USA Today came out with a story saying that fast food, that junk food wasn't quite as bad for us as previously thought. And I was thinking, where do they get a story like that? Who is beyond, who is behind that kind of story? And I think we're getting to a point where everybody knows, that they have advertisers, that this is a planted story. We all have a pretty good sense of what's good for us, what's healthy. But we've been through this period where people who tell us the things that on some level we know are true, they get censored, discredited, vilified, deplatformed, de-amplified, and we're told that they're dangerous. And you see this a lot over the last almost 20 years with Secretary Kennedy, that he was saying things that were challenging the status quo, that were a danger not to any person in this country, not to any family, not to any child, but they were a danger to a corrupt system that was being allowed to poison the American public. And then the media sort of became uh, the institution that sort of kept him down, that kept the public from recognizing that of course you should want people who challenge the status quo, that if you believe in science, you believe that challenging anything is a good thing. That if you read a medical book 20 years ago, you would know this more than I could ever know this. But if you read medical books from 20 years ago or 40 years ago or 60 years ago, the further back you go, the more, the further they are from what's consensus now, from what's, somewhat recognized now as being the best we can do. But science never ends. There is no science that just stops. Mm-hmm. So we want to have people in positions of power in the medical profession or at HHS who recognize that this is an endless quest to do a better job, to learn more, to get to a point where we can help the entire public make better decisions. But we've got all these companies that have the opposite incentive, that if you build a company, build a factory that makes a product, you're instantly anti-science because you can't make a product and make a profit selling that product if somebody comes along a month later and says, hey, you know what? There's a better way to make this kind of chips that is not as bad for people, right? Hmm. So you're then stuck defending your factory and your profit streams. And that's a fundamental problem, is that we need government officials to be pro-science. We need the public to be pro-science so that we can hold these companies to hold them accountable for their natural incentive to be anti-science.
Absolutely. And it's interesting if you go back and you look at our history as a country at the last turn of the century, not Y2K, but before that, the average age of death was 57, and now it's approaching 80. It was approaching 80, I should say, until about 3 years ago when it started going in the other direction. But it tells us that we can do something. We can change the curve. And, the biggest difference was people started paying attention to science and some of the things we were discovering about people's health and disseminating that information. And I think it's going to be the same answer for how do we get back on the right track. We have to look at real science and not pseudoscience. And I think the Maha movement is incredibly useful in getting us back on the right path. But if we continue down this road of paying attention to our health and actually doing something about it, what can you see as the future of health care in America 10 years from now?
Yeah, I would think that what I would like to see and what I think Maha stands for is just a radical transparency, but also a radical openness to ideas. That we have such incredible scientists and doctors in this country, and such great companies that are propelled forward by people who really want to do a better job, to create a better product. And so we need to really open the world up to innovation. And what's happened over the last 30, 40 years is that we've seen an incredibly narrowing, you know, um, of our government agencies favoring a very small number of big companies and then protecting them, and making it very difficult for for a scientist who's thinking about something new to actually have a breakthrough and have that breakthrough start to help people quickly. So I think what's possible is that we can do a much better job, and we can become the cutting edge of science in this country, so that people don't go to Mexico to get certain kinds of stem cell treatments done. They don't go to the Bahamas for certain kinds of things. They don't have to go to Germany, to Berlin, where there's this great clinic for knee surgery. That people from all around the world start coming here because they see that we're not controlled by a very small number of companies trying to squeeze more profits out of us. We're controlled by a feeling, a passion for innovation, a passion for doing a better job, a passion for health, so that it's okay to say anything. That like the Maha summit that we had last month. Um, we had people from all different sides of the medical field sitting on the stage together, discussing things. People who in the past would have really just thought, I would never talk to this person, that they didn't trust the other person. So we need to be open to everything so that we can really begin to have better health outcomes. And I think that's possible. And that's really what Maha stands for.
I think that's exactly right. And, as we travel across the country at ACI, interacting with various groups, one of the things that I've noticed in recent months is a lot of people are asking, how can I get involved? How can I get involved with Maha, with the movement, church groups, community organizations, families? What's the answer? How can people get involved?
Yeah, so I would think one way is to volunteer. So if you go to mahaaction.com, uh, on our website, there's a place to volunteer. But I would also come to our Wednesday Zoom calls. It's each Wednesday at 4 p.m. You can find out how to log on our website, and then you can attend some of the events that we're starting to have all around the country. You can follow us on our Substack, which is the Maha Report, and and really just start to learn more. And what Maha really stands for is questioning authority when it comes to health. So really start to study, become an expert in your own health, and help your own family first. And then once you start seeing real change, real progress in your own life, then I think start groups, start Maha groups at the local level, at the state level, and we can take back our country. And if we're going to have free people, like I said before, we have to have strong, healthy people, physically, mentally, spiritually. And that's possible. And that's the vision that I have for the future. And that's the real Maha vision. It's, ultimately not really political, but that's a way that change is possible. And it is clear that the group that we have in power, that Secretary Kennedy and his team, Dr. Oz, Jay Bhattacharya, Marty McCary, you, and so many other people, really are there not for money, not for power, not for fame. They're there because they really believe in making the country healthy, and they recognize that it's just not okay to have the sickest people on earth in the most powerful country on earth that's spending the most money of any country on earth.
Well, of all the people who are getting involved in doing something, you're a wonderful example because you've been in this from the very start. And that's why the Trump administration took note of you and what you were doing. And on behalf of all the people, I want to thank you for getting in there and showing what a person can do. I see all those books behind you. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved in publishing?
Yeah, I started publishing about 30 years back, and wanted to publish books that that challenged norms, that challenged the way people thought. Always liked the idea of people reading books that they disagree with. I hate the idea that people read newspapers, they listen to people, they have conversations with people who have exactly the same point as them. That the whole point of education, the point of reading, is to challenge yourself and is to be open to new ideas, new ways of seeing uh, really anything. And so to the extent that I can help that through publishing books that are dangerous books, and people have said that this is a dangerous publisher, and I think that's the best compliment that a publisher can get, that your ideas are not stuck, your ideas are not fixed, they're real science, they're coming at things from all different points of view. And that I think is a great thing, and that's something that I'm really proud of.
Well, you're a perfect example of how ordinary people can do extraordinary things, and we thank you for that inspiration. I hope you enjoyed that discussion with Tony Lyons, and we're grateful that you've taken the time to listen. Maha challenges us to stop settling for the status quo, to stop believing that poor health, physical, mental, and spiritual, is just how life is, and that we can't do anything about it. It challenges us to imagine a better vision for ourselves and for our country, one rooted in common sense, purpose, and community once again. And the truth is, our nation becomes stronger as we become healthier. When we make one small choice to eat whole foods over what's quick and convenient, when we choose to exercise rather than to make excuses, we choose to get outside and get fresh air rather than staying slouched at a desk for 12 hours a day, when we choose faith and connection with others and resilience over isolation and phone screens, when we show our families by our example that strong bodies and strong character go hand in hand. So as you go about this week, I want to challenge you to pick one thing, just one, that makes you a little stronger, a little clearer, a little more alive. That's how progress goes, not all at once, but step by step. And each week, choose another thing that you know can make you healthier. I hope you enjoyed this discussion with Tony today. We're glad to be back, and we hope you continue to listen every week. Tell your friends and people in your sphere of influence about us. We like those high ratings. You can see our podcasts also on YouTube at Common Sense with Dr. Ben Carson. Rate us, review us, tell your friends about us, and help make common sense common once again. And remember the principles, our cornerstone principles: faith, liberty, community, and life. We'll see you next week.